Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself stepping into another time, a time when the world moved at a slower, gentler pace, when the air was touched by the scent of wood smoke and horse-drawn wagons, and when the only glow in the evening came from the soft light of an oil lamp or the steady flicker of a fire in the hearth. The year rests somewhere in the final decades of the 1800s, deep in what history now calls the Gilded Age. But here, in this quiet corner of America, there is nothing glittering or grand, only the steady heartbeat of small town life, shaped by the honest work of ordinary people. The streets are narrow and uneven, paved in cobblestones worn smooth by countless wagon wheels. In the distance, you can see the outlines of buildings, their shapes softened by the deepening twilight. Brick storefronts stand side by side, some with faded painted signs advertising dry goods, tailoring, or the promise of fresh bread each morning. Wooden houses, modest but sturdy, cluster along the side roads. Their porches are lined with simple rocking chairs, a few of which creak softly in the evening breeze. The air holds a faint chill. It is winter now, and the sky has already begun to shift into its nighttime colors. There's a thin line of pink still clinging to the horizon, melting slowly into pale gray, blue, and higher still into the deep navy of night. A few stars have begun to prick the sky, delicate and steady. Overhead, the first sliver of the moon peeks out from behind a lace of drifting clouds, casting just enough silver light to make the snow sparkle faintly. This is a world without the rush of automobiles or the hum of electric lights. Here, evenings arrive with a hush. There is movement still. The day has not entirely ended, but everything feels unhurried, as if the entire town understands that the pace must now soften, allowing the day to drift gently toward rest. Work in this time begins early. Long before the sun has touched the rooftops, men and women are already rising. The sound of boots hitting the wooden floorboards echoes in the still, dark rooms. In some homes, a small fire is stirred back to life from the embers of the night before. In others, it is built anew, the scent of fresh kindling rising in the cool air. Breakfast is often simple, perhaps a slice of bread, maybe a warm biscuit if there was time to bake the day before, washed down with coffee brewed on the stove. Then comes the walk to work, boots crunching over frost or tapping over cobblestones. Some go to the factories, their breath puffing in the morning air as they make their way to the tall brick buildings that line the edge of town. The factory floor is a place of constant sound, machines clattering, belts turning, steam hissing. The air smells of oil, metal, and sometimes the faint tang of smoke from the nearby boiler. 12 hours here is not uncommon, and the body learns the rhythm of repetitive motion. There are brief pauses for meals, eaten quickly, before the hum of labor begins again. Others tend to smaller workshops, perhaps as carpenters, blacksmiths, or cobblers. These spaces are quieter than the factories, yet filled with their own music, the sharp ring of a hammer on iron, the rasp of a saw through wood, the soft shush of a brush sweeping shavings from a workbench. The air in such places holds the sense of the trade, iron and smoke, sawdust and leather, glue and polish. Though the hours are just as long, there is a personal pride in seeing a finished piece take shape in one's own hands. For those in the fields, the day is dictated by the sun. Even in winter, there is work, repairing fences, tending to livestock, hauling wood for the fires that must burn through the long nights. Hands grow rough from rope and tool handles, and the skin of the face turns ruddy from the wind. The labor is heavy, but it is also filled with moments of quiet, the stillness of a snow-covered pasture, the distant call of a crow, the creak of a wagon wheel as it rolls along the frozen earth. For all of these people, factory workers, craftsmen, farmers, The reward at day's end is modest. $1 a day is common, and though it will never make one wealthy, it is enough to provide the necessities: flour for bread, kerosene for the lamps, perhaps a little fabric for mending clothes. Each coin is earned with effort, each dollar stretched with care. And now, as the sun has slipped fully below the horizon, the town begins to transform. The tall factory chimneys grow dark as the last puffs of smoke drift into the night air. Workers leave in small groups, their conversations low and easy after the noise of the day. Boots crunch over the thin crust of snow that has formed on the road, leaving dark prints that will be covered again by morning. A horse-drawn cart rattles past, the driver's breath a cloud in the cold, reins in hand as he guides his animal toward home. Here and there, shopkeepers sweep the steps of their storefronts one final time before closing the door, the brass bell above it giving a soft ring. Curtains are drawn in the windows of homes, but the warm glow of lamplight seeps through the edges, spilling onto the snow in thin golden lines. The air is alive with the smell of wood fires, each home adding its own note to the chorus of winter scents. You step into one of these homes now, leaving behind the crisp night air for the warmth of a firelit room. The change is immediate: the gentle embrace of heat, the faint scent of cooking from earlier in the evening, the muffled quiet that only a well-insulated winter room can hold. The walls are lined with shelves of simple crockery, a few books, and perhaps a small framed photograph or two, the glass catching the firelight. A sturdy wooden table sits in the center, its surface marked by years of meals, sewing projects, and conversations. An oil lamp stands at one end of the table, its flame steady and bright within the glass chimney. Shadows sway gently along the walls as the flame shifts. On the stove, a kettle lets out a faint, steady hiss, the promise of hot tea or coffee to warm the hands before bed. Boots rest beside the hearth, drying from the damp of snow. A heavy quilt is draped over the back of a nearby chair, ready to be pulled close for the night. From the window, you can still see the quiet street, though it grows softer now, blurred slightly by the thin film of frost forming on the glass. A lone figure walks by, shoulders hunched slightly against the cold, but their steps are unhurried. The muffled sound of their boots fades quickly, replaced once more by the soft crackle of the fire. This is the rhythm of life here. Days are long, the work demanding, the pay modest. Yet there is something deeply grounding in its constancy. Each sunrise begins a familiar pattern. Each sunset ends it with rituals of rest. There are no electric lights to chase away the dark, no radios or telephones to fill the silence. Only the steady companionship of the hearth, the lamplight, and the company of those who share the home. You lean back in your chair, quilt wrapped around your shoulders, and listen to the house itself, the occasional pop from the fire, the slow tick of the mantel clock, the faint sigh of the wind outside. These sounds are as much a part of the setting as the streets and the fields. They are the voice of the Gilded Age at rest. And as you sit there, you realize that while history remembers the Gilded Age for its grand railroads, its tycoons, and its glittering wealth, the truer picture lies here in moments like this. A warm room after a cold day, a single coin placed carefully in a tin box, the comfort of knowing that, for tonight at least, you are home and safe. This is life for the average American in this time, not dramatic, not gilded with gold, but rich in small certainties, in the rituals that cradle a weary body at the end of a long day. The world outside will keep moving. Factories will start their machines again. Fields will wait for the morning sun. But for now, the evening belongs to stillness. The setting is quiet, timeless, and tender, holding within it the essence of a life lived not for spectacle, but for the steady rhythm of work and rest, day after day, year after year. And in this calm, you feel the deep, quiet truth of the era, that even in a time of long hours and small wages, there was beauty in the simple act of ending the day, gathering around the fire, and letting the night carry you gently toward tomorrow. In the world of the Gilded Age, the idea of work was woven into the very fabric of life. It began before the first hint of daylight reached over the horizon and continued long after the sun had slipped away. For the average American of this time, there was no choice in the matter. Work was the center of the day, the thing that sustained home and hearth. 12 hours was not considered an extraordinary shift. It was simply what was needed. A single dollar at the end of such a day was typical, and though it was small, it was treated with respect, carefully stretched to meet the week's needs. Imagine waking before the town has stirred. The air in the room is cool, your breath faintly visible in the early light. The stove has long since burned down from the night before, and the first task is to coax a flame back to life. There's the soft scrape of a match against the box, the gentle flare of light, and the slow building of warmth as wood begins to catch. Breakfast, if it can be called that, is quick. Perhaps a slice of bread or cornbread from the day before, maybe a thin porridge, sometimes nothing more than coffee. Meals are not leisurely affairs. They are fuel for the body before a long day. For those who labor in factories, the journey begins with the sound of boots on frozen ground in winter, or the crunch of gravel and dust in summer. The streets are still dark, lit only by the occasional street lamp or the dim glow from a shopkeeper's window. The factory itself stands tall and solid, often made of red brick, with high windows and a wide doorway that swallows up the workers as they arrive. Inside, the air is thick, sometimes with the scent of oil and iron, other times with the musty smell of cloth or leather. The noise is constant, a blend of mechanical rhythm and human movement, gears turning, belts whirring, hammers striking, voices calling above the din. The hours stretch on in long, even lines. Tasks are repeated over and over, hands moving almost of their own accord, bodies bending to the demands of the machines. Time is marked not by clocks, but by the feel of hunger and fatigue setting in. There is a break, brief and without ceremony, where food is eaten from a tin pail or wrapped paper. Perhaps bread with a smear of butter, maybe a slice of cheese or cold meat. Conversation is spare. The break is too short to waste on more than a few words. For others, the day unfolds in smaller workshops. These spaces are less crowded but no less demanding. A carpenter might begin with a piece of rough wood, shaping it with care into a table leg or a sturdy chair rung. The scent of fresh, cut lumber fills the room, mixing with the tang of varnish or glue. A blacksmith's shop smells of hot metal and smoke, the air sharp with the sound of hammer on anvil. Leatherworkers bend over their benches, stitching boots or harnesses with steady precision, the thread pulling through the hide in a rhythm as practiced as breathing. Then there are those whose work takes them outdoors, regardless of season. In the fields, the cold wind bites at cheeks and fingers in winter, while in summer the sun presses heavy and warm against the back. Livestock must be fed, fences mended, tools repaired. The land itself demands attention, rows tilled, seeds planted, crops tended. Even when the fields lie fallow, there is labor to be done, whether hauling wood, clearing brush, or tending to the needs of animals. In all these places, factories, workshops, and fields, the body is in constant motion. Muscles ache, hands grow rough, and fatigue seeps in long before the day's end. The work is physical, but it is also a quiet test of patience. Hours pass without change, each task blending into the next. And yet, this repetition, this constancy, is the heartbeat of life in this time. As the day wears on, light changes. The high windows of a factory catch the shifting sun. moving from pale morning gold to the long shadows of afternoon. In a workshop, the angle of light sharpens across the workbench, highlighting dust motes that swirl slowly in the air. Outside, the sounds of town life drift in and out, a cart rattling over stones, the call of a peddler, the clop of a horse's hooves. By the time the workday finally draws to a close, the air feels different, lighter somehow, as though the weight of the hours is finally easing. For factory workers, the machines slow and stop, leaving an almost startling quiet in their wake. In the workshops, tools are put away, the day's pieces neatly stacked or hung. On the farms, the last chores are finished as the light fades, animals settled for the night, gates closed. The pay for such long hours, about $1, is small by modern measures, yet in this time it holds value. A coin placed carefully into a pocket or small tin represents food on the table, oil for the lamps, perhaps a bit of fabric for mending clothes. It is not extravagant, but it is enough to keep life moving. Every purchase is considered, every penny accounted for. Waste is rare because it cannot be afforded, and though the work is long, it shapes the rhythm of the days. People measure time not in vacations or grand events, but in the reliable cycle of labor and rest, of sunrise beginnings and sunset endings. There is a sense of shared experience, too, neighbors and friends walking home at the same hour, their paths crossing in the quiet streets. Conversations are short but warm, a nod of recognition or a few words about the weather, the harvest, or the latest shipment to the general store. The memory of work never fully leaves the body, even after the boots are taken off and the tools set down. Shoulders still feel the weight of lifting, hands carry the faint sting of rough material, ears hum with the remembered sounds of the day. But these sensations are part of the life, accepted as naturally as the changing of the seasons. In the Gilded Age, work is not just something done for survival, it is the framework upon which life is built. Each day, whether spent in the hum of a factory, the focused quiet of a workshop, or the open air of the fields, follows the same steady arc. The dollar earned is not simply money. It is proof of endurance, of skill, of the ability to meet the demands of the day and still return home when it is done. And so, as evening falls, there is a certain satisfaction in that return. The roads leading out of the factories and workshops fill with the slow movement of tired but steady steps. The sky deepens into shades of lavender and blue, a few lamps glowing in windows ahead. Home awaits, not lavish, but warm enough, with a meal to be shared and a place to rest until morning comes and the cycle begins anew. The work may be long and the pay small, but within it lies the rhythm of the age, a life measured not by riches or ease, but by the quiet pride of a day completed, the coin in the pocket, and the simple comfort of knowing that tomorrow will come and you will meet it again with the same steady heart. Evening comes slowly in a Gilded Age town, as though the light itself knows there is no need to hurry. The long day's work is finally done, and there is a quiet change in the air, a soft loosening, like the gentle untying of a knot. The heat of effort begins to fade from tired muscles, and the rhythm of footsteps grows unhurried. The town, which only hours before hummed with motion and industry, now seems to breathe more slowly, preparing to slip into rest. The first signs of evening appear in the way light touches the streets. The sun, sinking low, throws long golden beams between buildings, catching in the frost on window panes or the faint dust rising from wagon wheels. Cobblestones gleam faintly in the last of the day's warmth, and shop windows, some still open for business, reflect the fading light like pieces of polished amber. Here and there, someone strikes a match and lights a lamp. The glow is gentle, not bright or harsh, spilling out through glass and into the cooling air. On the main street, Lamps atop tall iron posts flicker to life one by one, casting soft, imperfect circles of gold on the ground. In their pools of light you can see every detail: the pattern of wagon tracks in the dirt, the prints of boots, the thin scatter of snow beginning to fall. The air itself begins to change with the hour. During the day it carried the smells of labor, oil and metal from the factory, sawdust from the carpenter's shop, the earthy scent of damp fields. Now it is filled with homelier fragrances. A loaf of bread cooling on a windowsill gives off a warm, yeasty scent. Somewhere nearby, a chimney sends up a thin curl of smoke, fragrant with hickory or oak. The mingled aromas of stews, roasted root vegetables, and baked pies drift out from kitchens, blending into a fragrance so comforting it seems to settle on the shoulders like a blanket. The pace in the streets slows to match the hour. A lone wagon makes its way down the main road, the horse's hooves tapping out a steady, measured beat. The driver sits hunched in his coat, reins loose in his hands, eyes scanning the quiet street ahead. He is in no rush. The day's business is done, and home is near. Behind him, the wooden wheels of the wagon hum against the cobblestones, a sound so familiar it blends seamlessly into the background of evening. Groups of workers walk together, their conversations low and easy. Laughter is rare at this hour, not because there is sadness, but because the kind of tired that comes from honest work does not leave room for loudness. Instead, there is a gentle companionship in the shared quiet. A neighbor calls out a greeting from across the street, and the reply is a nod or a brief word, warm but unhurried. Shadows lengthen as the last light of the sun slips away, and with them comes a deeper stillness. In narrow side streets, the lamplight is softer, filtered through the frost in the air. Wooden houses line these quieter roads, their windows glowing faintly from within. Curtains are drawn against the cold, but not before the glow from an oil lamp spills onto the snow, turning it to a patch of molten gold. If you pause here, the sounds of evening gather around you. There is the soft creak of a sign swinging gently from a shop front, the murmur of two voices passing by, the distant clatter of dishes as a family sets the table for supper. From far off, a train whistle rises, a long, low note carried on the wind. It is not a sharp call, but a weary sigh, fading into the night as the train moves on toward the next town. As the light dims further, the edges of the world seem to blur. The snow in the air thickens, falling in slow, deliberate flakes. Each one catches in the lamplight, glinting for a heartbeat before vanishing into the whiteness below. The streets grow quieter still, the traffic of the day replaced by the occasional solitary figure making their way home. The crunch of boots in fresh snow becomes one of the clearest sounds, crisp and satisfying in the hush. This is a moment when the town feels almost suspended between two worlds. The demands of the day have been set down, but the complete stillness of night has not yet arrived. It is a gentle in-between where the senses notice small details, the way the lamplight paints long shadows from the wheels of a wagon, the way the snow gathers in the curve of a railing, the way breath curls up in soft clouds before disappearing into the air. And yet, for all its stillness, there is life here, life that moves at an easy pace, that knows the value of taking its time. A shopkeeper finishes sweeping his steps, brushing the last few snowflakes aside before locking the door. A child peeks from behind a curtain, watching the flakes fall faster, hoping perhaps for enough snow to play in tomorrow. A man pauses on his porch to knock the snow from his boots before stepping inside, the sound of the door closing behind him swallowed instantly by the quiet. The streets themselves seem to rest. No carts rattle quickly by now, no voices shout to be heard over the noise of work. The cobblestones are mostly empty, the few passers by moving in a slow, unbroken rhythm. The lamplighter, his tall pole in hand, moves from post to post. touching flame to wick until the whole street glows with a gentle, wavering light. By the time full darkness settles, the town has taken on the feeling of a story book illustration, each lamp a soft golden star, each shadow deep and calm, each window a glimpse into another world. Inside those windows are families gathered at their tables, the clink of cutlery and the murmur of conversation mixing with the occasional burst of quiet laughter. The air outside carries all these sounds lightly, wrapping them in the snow's muffling touch. In the quieter corners, far from the main road, the evening deepens into pure calm. The snow lies undisturbed on rooftops, fences, and the bare branches of trees. A stray dog trots along, leaving a neat trail of prints before disappearing into the shadows. The cold air is clean, each breath sharp yet refreshing, carrying with it the scent of distant fires and the faint metallic tang of snow. The beauty of this time of day is in its unremarkable perfection. Nothing grand happens here, nothing worthy of a headline, and yet the scene is whole in itself. The slowing of footsteps, the dimming of light, the mingling of warm scents and cold air. These are the quiet markers of an evening in Gilded Age America. They are as much a part of life as the work that fills the hours before, and perhaps even more deeply felt. For in this pause, the day truly finds its end, and the night opens its gentle arms. If you were to stand in the center of the street now and close your eyes, you might hear only the softest sounds. The faint hiss of snow settling on the ground, the muffled strike of a clock tower's bell, the low rustle of a wool coat as someone passes by. These sounds, so small and delicate, carry with them the sense of a world at peace with its own pace. And as the last errands are run, as the final shutters are closed, the streets empty entirely. The lamps continue their quiet burning, holding back the darkness in little circles. Above, the stars grow brighter, their light colder but steady. The snow continues its patient fall, covering the day's tracks and smoothing the earth into a soft, unbroken canvas. It is in these moments that the true atmosphere of the Gilded Age evening settles over the town, unhurried, unadorned, yet filled with quiet richness. It is the calm after effort, the gentle turning of the day's final page, the promise of rest to come. In every flicker of lamplight and every drifting flake, there is the assurance that tomorrow will come in its own time, and tonight will hold until it does. The modest wooden homes of the Gilded Age, tucked along narrow streets or standing quietly in the countryside, were more than mere shelters. They were havens from the harshness of the outside world. After the long hours of labor, after the dust and the noise and the endless movement of the workday, crossing the threshold into such a home felt like stepping into another realm, one wrapped in gentle light and familiar scents. The moment the latch clicked shut behind you, the chill of the evening was traded for the slow, enveloping warmth of a fire that had been tended since late afternoon. It was not a heat that blasted or startled, but one that radiated patiently, creeping into your bones until the stiffness of the day began to ease. The hearth was the heart of the home, both in the practical and the poetic sense. A wood, burning stove or open fireplace was more than a source of warmth. It was the quiet pulse of daily life. In its glow, one could see the worn silhouettes of chairs drawn close, the roughened grain of the table's surface, polished by countless meals, and the soft shine of a kettle set upon the heat. The air carried a mingling of scents, the dry, almost sweet aroma of burning wood, the faint tang of iron from the stove, and the homely fragrance of bread that had been baked earlier in the day, still lingering in the corners. Every scent spoke of sustenance, of survival, and of the small, steady joys that made the long hours of work worth enduring. Oil lamps, their glass chimneys slightly smudged from use, cast a gentle amber light that softened the edges of the room. Shadows pooled in the corners, not ominous but protective, like old friends standing watch. The light was steady but tender, painting everything in hues of gold and honey. It did not pierce the eyes as the stark glare of electric bulbs would in decades to come, but instead caressed them, inviting you to rest, to linger, to allow your mind to wander without hurry. In these homes, possessions were modest and few, yet every object seemed to hold a story. A quilt draped over the back of a chair might have been stitched by a grandmother's careful hands, each square a patch from a worn-out dress or shirt, carrying with it years of memory. A simple bookshelf, perhaps no more than 2 planks set upon bricks, might hold a small collection of well-thumbed books, volumes of poetry, a family Bible, perhaps a copy of a novel passed from neighbor to neighbor until its cover grew soft from handling. The furniture, often handmade or bought second-hand, bore the marks of time, scratches from children's games, grooves worn by elbows resting during quiet conversations. The polish faded where hands had held on for support. The sounds inside were as much a comfort as the sights. The fire crackled with slow, deliberate pops, and occasionally a log shifted, sending up a soft hiss as sap met flame. A kettle on the stove might murmur with the beginnings of a boil, promising tea or coffee. Outside, muffled by walls and snow, the world continued on in quiet rhythms, horse hooves clopping faintly down the road, a wagon wheel creaking, perhaps the distant call of a neighbor bidding good night. These sounds did not intrude but reassured, marking the continuity of life beyond the home's door. Children, if there were any, might be sprawled on the rug before the fire, their cheeks rosy from the cold, their hands wrapped around mugs of warm milk or cider. Their laughter, even when subdued, had a brightness to it that filled the room like music. Parents, their faces lined not just with age but with the marks of steady work, would share a glance, silent but full of understanding, before settling into their chairs. A mending basket might be brought to the table, and under the warm glow of the lamp, hands would work slowly, stitching tears in trousers or darning socks. These acts, though humble, carried with them a deep tenderness, a way of saying without words, "You are cared for, you are kept." Winter evenings in such homes were especially cherished. Outside, the air was sharp and biting, the ground firm with frost, but inside, slippers scuffed against worn rugs, and the very walls seemed to hold the warmth like an embrace. Coats were hung carefully on hooks by the door, still carrying the crisp scent of snow, and boots were placed near enough to the fire that, by morning, they would be dry and supple again. Sometimes a pot of stew would simmer on the stove for hours, filling the air with the rich, savory perfume of carrots, onions, and tender meat. It was a scent that seeped into clothing, into hair, into the very memory of a household. The rhythm of life in these homes was unhurried in the evenings. There was no rush to check a clock, for the workday was done and the night belonged to rest. Conversation meandered like a slow-moving stream, touching on small events of the day, news from the neighborhood, or memories from years past. Words were often punctuated by comfortable silences, the kind that did not need filling, for they too were part of the home's quiet music. As night deepened, preparations for sleep unfolded in gentle ritual. The fire would be banked to last until morning, its glow dimming but still steady. Lamps were trimmed, their flames coaxed down to soft pinpoints before being snuffed out, leaving only the lingering scent of warm oil. Beds, often simple wooden frames, topped with thick mattresses stuffed with straw or feathers, awaited beneath layers of quilts. The feel of those quilts was familiar, the slight weight, the cool touch at first, then the growing warmth as body heat gathered beneath them. In the dim light, shadows from the last embers danced on the walls, lulling eyes to close. The modest home in the Gilded Age was not a place of luxury by the standards of the wealthy mansions that dotted certain parts of the country, yet its value was immeasurable to those who lived there. It was a place where the hardness of the outside world softened, where the smallest comforts, a warm cup, a stitched quilt, a fire's steady hum, took on the weight of treasures. Every creak of the floorboards, every wisp of smoke from the chimney, every sigh of the wind against the shutters seemed to whisper the same thing: here you are safe. On the great estates of the Gilded Age, the houses rose like monuments to ambition and taste, their silhouettes visible long before a traveler reached the gates. Approaching along a winding drive, the first glimpse might be of a grand facade, stone or brick, sometimes ornamented with turrets, balconies, and long rows of arched windows that caught the sunlight and reflected it in warm flashes. The grounds themselves were carefully composed landscapes where nature had been shaped and tamed into elegance. Wide lawns swept outward like green carpets, interrupted by marble fountains whose streams of water fell with a sound like distant rain. Pathways meandered through manicured gardens, past flower-beds arranged in geometric precision, past trimmed hedges that stood like living walls. As one drew closer, the scale of such a home became even more impressive. Steps of polished stone led to massive double doors, their dark wood carved with patterns or family crests, the brass handles gleaming from regular polishing. Above the entrance, perhaps a great lantern hung, ready to cast a welcoming glow over guests arriving in the evening. The very air at the threshold seemed to hum with the promise of refinement, the sense that inside awaited a world designed not merely for living, but for displaying life in its most cultivated form. Crossing into the entry hall was like stepping into another realm entirely. The ceilings soared high above, sometimes painted with frescoes of clouds, cherubs, or mythological scenes. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rainstorms, scattering light in thousands of delicate sparks across polished marble floors. The echo of footsteps here was soft yet resonant, a reminder of the vast space surrounding you. Rich carpets, imported from distant countries, covered certain portions of the floor, their patterns deep with color and history. The scent of the place was subtle but unmistakable, a blend of beeswax from polished wood, fresh flowers in tall vases, and the faintest whisper of perfume clinging to the air from a lady's passing. To the left or right, broad staircases curved upward, their balustrades smooth under the hand, leading to private chambers above. But on the ground floor, the public rooms beckoned with open doorways framed by elaborate moldings. The drawing room might be the first stop, its walls covered in silk damask or patterned wallpaper, the windows dressed in heavy drapes of velvet or brocade. Sunlight filtered in through lace curtains beneath, catching on the gilt frames of oil paintings that depicted serene landscapes, family portraits, or historical scenes. The furniture was arranged not merely for comfort, but for conversation and display. Upholstered chairs and sofas in rich fabrics, low tables bearing porcelain figurines, crystal bowls, or silver tea services. Every surface seemed to bear some object that spoke of wealth, refinement, or a connection to faraway places. Beyond lay the library, a room designed for both solitude and display of intellect. Dark wood shelves climbed from floor to ceiling, lined with leather, bound volumes whose spines bore gold lettering. Ladders on rails allowed one to reach the highest shelves, and the scent here was rich and slightly sweet, the smell of paper, leather, and polished oak. A fireplace might stand at one end, its mantel adorned with bronze clockworks or marble statues, its hearth laid with logs that would be lit on chilly evenings. Deep chairs and a broad desk invited both reading and quiet correspondence, the kind of thoughtful moments that gave rhythm to the life of the house. The dining room was perhaps the most ceremonious space of all. A long table, sometimes stretching the length of the room, gleamed beneath the light of another chandelier, its surface laid with linen, silver, and crystal that caught the light in bright points. Chairs with carved backs and padded seats lined each side, and along the walls stood sideboards or cabinets displaying fine china behind glass doors. Meals here were not hurried affairs. They were events, accompanied by the quiet presence of servants who moved like shadows to refill glasses or bring the next course. Conversation might flow easily, but the setting itself reminded all who sat there of the formality and order that underpinned such a household. In the background of this grandeur was the work that kept it alive. The kitchens, often located in the basement or at the far reaches of the house, were bustling domains of heat, sound, and scent. Copper pots hung from racks above broad preparation tables, and ovens glowed with the steady flames that turned raw ingredients into feasts. Pantry shelves were lined with jars of preserves, sacks of flour, and carefully labeled spices from across the globe. Servants moved here with practiced coordination, cooks, scullery maids, butlers, each performing their role to ensure that the elegance above stairs was never disrupted by the chaos of preparation. Servants' quarters, though far plainer than the family's rooms, were none the less sturdy and functional. Narrow beds, simple wooden dressers, and hooks for clothing were the main furnishings, but even here there was the comfort of warmth from the kitchen fires and the camaraderie of shared labor. The rhythm of life for those who worked in the great house was measured by the needs of the family, early mornings, late nights, and the unending cycle of cleaning, polishing, tending fires, and preparing meals. Yet for the family who owned such an estate, the home was more than a dwelling. It was a stage upon which their social and personal identities were played out. Balls might be held in the grand hall, with musicians performing beneath glittering lights as couples moved in graceful patterns across the floor. Afternoon teas could take place in the conservatory, where exotic plants and flowers bloomed year-round under glass, and the light fell through the panes in soft, dappled patterns. Guests might stroll in the gardens, pausing by reflecting pools or gazebos, their conversations mingling with the songs of birds. Evenings in such homes often brought a gentle quiet once the guests had departed and the servants had withdrawn to their quarters. Family might gather in a smaller sitting room, away from the formality of the main spaces, to read by lamplight or speak in low voices. The crackle of a fire, the ticking of an ornate clock, and the rustle of pages turning might be the only sounds. Outside, the vast lawns stretched into the darkness, their stillness broken only by the whisper of wind in the trees or the distant call of a night bird. These houses were built to endure, both in stone and in memory. They carried the imprint of the era's ambition, the desire to show not only success but permanence, to create something that would stand as a legacy. Every detail, from the curve of a banister to the pattern of a tiled floor, was a statement of intention. To walk through such a home was to move through a carefully crafted world, one that balanced display with the rhythms of daily life, where the grandeur of a reception room could exist alongside the quiet comfort of a personal study. And yet, beneath all the layers of wealth and refinement, these grand houses still carried the essence of home. Behind the carved doors and marble columns, families lived, loved, quarreled, and reconciled, just as in humbler dwellings. Children played in hidden corners, laughter echoing in spaces never meant for guests. Pets dozed in patches of sunlight. And when the day was done, no matter how splendid the surroundings, the simple act of retreating to one's room, drawing the curtains, and settling into bed carried the same gentle satisfaction found in any home, a moment of rest before another day unfolded within the walls of a house that was both a symbol and a sanctuary, The sounds of the Gilded Age evening settle over the town like a soft woolen blanket, each note and murmur weaving itself into the fabric of the night. It begins quietly, so quietly that you might think the world is holding its breath. From somewhere far beyond the row of narrow streets, a church bell tolls the hour, its deep, resonant tone moving slowly through the cold air. The sound drifts and lingers, not hurried, as though it knows there is nowhere urgent to be. Each chime fades into the stillness before the next begins, leaving behind a gentle echo that feels almost like a memory rather than a sound. In the distance, the rhythmic crunch of wagon wheels on packed snow begins to hum, a creaking wooden cart drawn by a pair of tired horses. The wheels, bound in iron, roll with a muffled grind over the frozen ground, and the horses' hooves make a steady, measured beat, the kind of sound that seems to speak of patience. They pass slowly, their breath rising in small clouds that briefly shimmer in the light of a nearby gas lamp before melting back into the dark. The driver, bundled in a heavy coat and scarf, doesn't hurry. He leans forward just slightly, the reins loose in his hands, guiding the team homeward after a long day. Closer now, nearer to the homes lining the street, the faint shuffle of boots over wooden porch steps can be heard. Doors open and close with soft thuds, sending out brief bursts of warm air scented with cooking and firewood into the cold night. Inside, the low crackle and pop of a hearth fire becomes the heartbeat of each home. The flames whisper and sigh as they consume the logs, their glow painting the walls in shifting amber light. Every once in a while, a piece of wood gives way with a sudden snap, sending tiny sparks dancing upward before they vanish into the chimney. From an open window left ajar for a moment, the faint strains of a fiddle drift into the street, played slowly and tenderly. The tune is familiar and old, one of those songs that has no true beginning or end, just a winding path of notes that seem to circle back on themselves like a rocking chair swaying to and fro. Somewhere else, muffled by brick walls and distance, the tinkling of a piano carries through, played by fingers that seem to know the keys more from memory than sight. The music doesn't compete with the quiet, it joins it, folding into the night until it feels like part of the stillness. On the main road, a single lamplighter makes his way down the street, footsteps steady, the faint metallic clink of his ladder and pole announcing his presence. Each time he lifts the flame to a glass lantern, there is a brief hiss as the gas catches, then a warm, yellow light blooms within. The soft flicker adds another voice to the night, a visual one, yet still somehow audible in the imagination. In these quiet moments, the lamps seem to hum softly, their glow pooling at the edges of the road, keeping the darkness at bay. The town breathes slowly. Somewhere a dog lets out a short, drowsy bark before curling up again on the porch, the sound fading quickly into silence. A baby cries briefly in one home, the wail sharp and fragile, before a mother's gentle shushing quiets it again. The low hum of conversation slips through thin walls, neighbors speaking in the slow, unhurried tones of people who know there is no need to rush the night away. If you listen closely, you might even catch the faint rustle of paper as someone turns the pages of an evening newspaper by the fire, or the gentle clink of a spoon stirring tea in a ceramic cup. These sounds are small, almost invisible in the larger stillness, yet they are the very heartbeat of this place. They remind you that in every modest home, life is continuing in its own quiet way, people resting, sharing, thinking, and simply being. Over it all is the almost imperceptible whisper of the wind. It moves between the houses and down narrow alleys, carrying with it the scent of coal smoke and fresh bread from the baker, who has already begun preparing for the morning. The wind is not sharp or biting tonight. It moves like a friend, soft and slow, just enough to stir the edges of scarves and set the street lamps flickering ever so slightly. Eventually, the wagons have all passed, The church bells have gone still, and the last notes of the fiddle fade into silence. What remains is the quiet crackle of fires, the occasional muffled cough, and the gentle sound of breathing, both from those sleeping indoors and from the town itself, as though the streets and rooftops have settled into slumber. The night holds everything in its care. The sounds of this Gilded Age evening are not grand or remarkable. They are the humble, enduring music of ordinary life. And as the hours pass, they soften even further until all that is left is the steady rhythm of rest, carrying every soul gently toward morning. The deep stillness of the Gilded Age night stretches onward, holding the town in a quiet embrace that feels almost sacred. The gas lamps cast their soft pools of amber light on the cobblestone streets, each one glowing like a tiny hearth in the open air. Their glass panes glisten faintly with condensation, the cool air wrapping around them while the warm flame inside breathes a steady, gentle life. Beyond the reach of their glow, shadows deepen, soft and velvety, folding themselves into alleyways and corners until they are indistinguishable from the night itself. The stars above seem sharper in the cold air, their light untainted by the constant electric glare that the future will one day bring. Here, in this time, the heavens are vast and unbroken, a sprawling tapestry of silver against the dark. They seem close enough to touch, and yet impossibly far, quietly reminding all who look up that the world is bigger than the boundaries of this small town. Every so often, a thin wisp of cloud drifts across the sky, moving lazily, almost as if reluctant to disturb the scene. Inside the modest homes, the warmth of the hearth keeps the night at bay. The fires have burned down to embers, glowing with a steady, deep red light that pulses softly, almost like the coals themselves are breathing. They cast long, slow, moving shadows across the wooden floors and the well-worn furniture, shadows that sway with the faintest movements of the flames. In the corners of the rooms, the air feels still, holding on to the scents of the day: baked bread, boiled potatoes, the faint tang of coal smoke that has seeped into the walls over the years. Children, wrapped in woolen blankets, lie tucked in narrow beds, their breathing slow and even. The faint squeak of an old mattress accompanies a sleepy turn, but the sound quickly fades back into the quiet rhythm of rest. Beside them, in another room, a mother sits in the low light, mending a shirt with steady, patient hands. The thread whispers through the fabric with each stitch, her head bent close to her work, though her eyes grow heavier with every passing moment. She listens absently to the distant sound of boots in the street outside, a late returner making his way home, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Farther down the road, the last saloon is closing for the night. The rickety door swings shut with a muted thud, and the faintest hint of laughter drifts out before being swallowed by the air. Inside, chairs are being stacked, and the dull scrape of wood on wood is followed by the sweep of a broom over the creaking floorboards. The barkeep hums to himself as he works, a low and tuneless murmur that keeps him company in the near-empty room. His lantern throws a warm circle of light ahead of him, and when he blows it out at last, the shadows reclaim the space completely. On the edges of town, where the houses thin and the land opens into fields and meadows, the night grows deeper. A thin layer of frost coats the ground, glittering faintly in the starlight. The bare branches of trees stand motionless against the sky, their skeletal outlines silent and still. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, one low, echoing note that seems to hang in the air far longer than it should. In reply, another owl answers from somewhere farther off, their conversation stretching invisibly across the dark. Along the railway tracks, the iron rails gleam faintly, catching what little light filters down from above. No trains will pass until morning, but the air still holds the memory of them, the distant thunder of wheels, the long, mournful cry of a whistle. Tonight, the tracks are silent, stretching endlessly into the dark, their parallel lines a quiet promise that the world beyond the horizon is still out there, waiting. In a small boarding house, a group of laborers share a cramped upper room. They have returned late from the factories, their hands rough and darkened with soot, their shoulders sagging with the weight of another 12-hour day. One by one, they lie down on their narrow bunks, boots placed neatly beside them, coats folded at the foot of the bed. They speak in low voices at first, telling short fragments of the day's work or a half-remembered joke, but the words grow fewer until they are replaced entirely by the slow, steady sound of breathing. Soon, the room is filled with the warm, communal rhythm of sleep. Even the animals seem to feel the stillness of the hour. In the stables, the horses shift softly in their stalls, the faint rustle of hay and the occasional stamp of a hoof the only sounds. Their breath rises in small clouds that vanish almost instantly, and the scent of straw mixes with the earthy warmth of their coats. Outside, a dog curls tightly into a ball at the corner of a porch, nose tucked beneath its tail twitching slightly as it dreams. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster, confused by the brightness of the stars, gives a tentative crow, but the night remains unbroken, and no dawn follows. The wind, gentle and slow, moves through the town like a quiet caretaker. It carries the faintest sounds, wood settling in the cold, the tap of a loose shutter against a wall, the sigh of a chimney releasing its final threads of smoke. It moves on, down the lanes and across the fields, until it reaches the river at the edge of town. There, the water flows in slow, steady currents, the surface catching and scattering bits of starlight. The soft gurgle of the river is a lullaby all its own, one that has played long before the Gilded Age began and will play long after it has passed. In these hours before dawn, time feels suspended. The world exists in shades of gold from the lamps, silver from the moon, and deep, velvety black from the shadows that stretch across the land. It is a moment in which nothing demands haste, in which the simplest acts, breathing, resting, listening, are enough to fill the night, and so the town sleeps on, each person folded gently into the quiet. The night will hold them all, factory workers, shopkeepers, mothers, children, the lonely and the loved, until the first pale light of morning begins to brush against the windows. But for now, there is only the stillness, the warmth of hearth and blanket, the soft hum of life at rest. It is the sound of peace, of a world not yet hurried by the pace of the future, and it lingers like a blessing in the dark.